how many of you have been to a DPFL conference presentation before? Okay, cool. And how many of you have been to an actual like on-the-ground training or seminar at a shelter or your shelter? Nice. All right, well, welcome back. Hopefully this has got some interesting content for you. But most of you then have seen this slide just to let you know what DPFL our objective is and work for animal welfare organizations, that we want to support you in functioning in that as that safe haven for lost and surrendered companion animals. We want to help you provide both good medical but also behavioral resources to serve your canine population, and that's actually really a big deal now. When I first started teaching playgroups to shelters around the country, typically the medical departments were the most resistant to us coming for pretty logical reasons. They're thinking, no way am I going to let you throw all our dogs in together. The disease transmission and the risk of injury. So those were really important concerns. But thank goodness now we've got some big support from the shelter medicine schools like the University of Florida, University of Wisconsin, and Dr. Jefferson also at APA. And the vets are really getting behind this concept of having playgroups in shelters so that we're treating the whole animal, and that if they're happier, then they're going to be healthier, and that's going to help us get them adopted. So that wheel is a little bit greased for us at this point, which is awesome. And we want to help you save as many lives as possible, but not at the expense of people or communities, right? And I think that's the hardest part of the work that we do, especially when we get to this top level of life saving. And we want to help be good educators, so we're bringing you some of the latest and greatest, which is kind of the purpose of this particular presentation, to tell you that what we've learned about the impact of playgroups. So our motto now is every dog, every day. That's what we really want to help shelters get to, that this should be playgroups and getting dogs out of their enclosures every day and being able to socialize with other dogs. We want this to become a standard of care. You know, that people are saying, do you remember the day when we didn't have playgroups? That you feed your dogs, you clean your dogs, and you give them an opportunity to go to playgroups. Some of them are going to show you that that's not fun for them, and that's great. They can do all the regular enrichment stuff, but most of your population can be really beneficial for them. We want to make sure that they get a chance. So this is just like a little silly video. We want shelters to we're talking about length of stay like crazy at this particular conference, which I'm really excited about. So we don't want to be home for these animals. We're going to love them and be like their best friends, like camp counselors. We want you guys to think of yourselves as just like a summer camp. They come in and they learn some new skills, they meet some new friends, maybe they do some arts and crafts. You've heard that joke before. And then they get to go home, and that's where all the real bonding occurs. We do not want them hanging out with us in the shelters.
January 29th.
But, you got to have fun in the process.
Grand opening.
It's all about fun, so wait for it. Rough job, run around the country and play your dogs.
We don't have any fun at our yard.
Someone's got to do it, right? This is actually it. Look at the dogs. They're like, what are you guys doing? And look at Emily. Wait for it. When there's a freeze frame on Emily at the end of it, it's awesome. Check it out.
Look at them go.
Did you see? Right? All right, so this is what it's all about. We want this to be fun and exciting for all of us. That was at the Escambia shelter recently. We were invited. It was a huge privilege. Shelter Me has done an episode on Dogs Playing for Life, and they were shooting the episode for Rescue Rebuild. If you guys don't know about Rescue Rebuild, they are amazing. And so we were invited. They built play yards as per our specifications. That's available on our website if you want recommendations about how to build out play yards that are specifically designed to rotate a full population of dogs. They're up there. So they built Rescue Rebuild built those enclosures and the play yards to our specifications, and then we were invited to implement the program and get them started during the shoot for Shelter Me, so that was super exciting. We were waiting for all the politicians. We were set up for them all to come and check out the play yards. So we were having fun while we were waiting. So to give you the quick timeline of how this whole thing kind of started, I did talk about this yesterday on the panel discussion, that in 1998, one of my clients basically said, I'd like to pay your hourly rate for you to go to the shelter and start helping the dogs there. She walks dogs at that shelter, and so she started donating me to the Southampton Animal Shelter, and that's where I started learning about developing canine training and enrichment programs specific to shelter dogs, because I learned well, it wasn't so quick. It was like a 6-month learning curve for me to recognize that I shouldn't be applying exactly what I do with my private clients for the shelter dogs, and Carrie did a beautiful job talking about that, not relying upon relationship to progress them, thinking about training a little bit clinically, loving on them, making it fun, but not relying upon our relationship to progress them. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned. That all started back then. In 2005, I was sent to Colorado, the same woman. She had her reasons, but she asked if I would relocate my family and work with the Longmont Humane Society and build an enrichment training and behavior program for them. They had an awesome volunteer program that was already up and running, so I think that had a lot to do with the success of folding in the behavior program because the volunteers were kind of there and ready to get going with us. In 2009, that's when I did my first playgroup seminar for a shelter outside of the one that I was working at. And that was in Florida, and that was thanks to Animal Farm Foundation. In 2010, they began sponsoring our seminars, and they've been behind us the whole way. I mean, if it was not for Animal Farm Foundation, we would literally not be here today. And then in 2011, we started the mentorships, and we contract them. They're hosted at APA. Have any of you been to a playgroup mentorship? Yay! Okay, so we have mentorships at APA and also at Longmont Humane Society. And then in 2015, I actually stupidly or wonderfully parted ways from that wonderful woman that I was working for all those years and decided I was going to jump all in and focus on just trying to provide the playgroup seminars. So we created the nonprofit of Dogs Playing for Life, and in that year we served our 100th shelter. My son and I actually, we were the ones going on the road, and in 2015 he and I did 70 shelters ourselves. That was pretty crazy. We still like each other, right? And then in 2017, that's when we hit our 200th shelter, and we have a lot of sponsorship now. Pet Finder Foundation jumped in and is now sponsoring the mentorships, and so we've got little cards and flyers about that. You have to pay your expenses to get to APA or Longmont, but the mentorship is sponsored. And then also ASPCA and Petco Foundation. Maddie's Fund jumped in also in 2015 and sponsored a bunch of seminars for us, and then the ASPCA and Petco got behind us in a big way for a 3-year grant and in the road to 500. They want to see us in 500 open admission municipal shelters around the country. So there is sponsorship and funding for those kinds of shelters. And then we have recently, amazing, but a fully turnkey facility was donated to us in Florida. So that little thing that I talked about yesterday about I'd love to see behavior programs actually out of the adoption centers, we're giving it a shot for the first time. We've got a facility now in Florida, and we are actually serving, if any of you know the Save the 21 campaign, anybody know about the Ontario dogs? Yeah, guess where they are? We've got them. All right, so these are the common concerns that we hear from shelters about implementing playgroups or getting going, is that, first of all, they say, well, we're functioning without them and that's working for us. We hear that a lot. We might get an outbreak. We need people to be safe. There's so much risk involved. We don't have the time or the staff to get the dogs out daily. That's a big one, and we want to really turn that one on its head because playgroups actually can be super efficient for a lot of other things, not just getting the dogs out to play. It can facilitate cleaning. If you have a kennel where the dogs have to be removed from their enclosures to be cleaned, implementing playgroups can, amazingly speed up that process. My favorite story about that was when we went to Indianapolis, Animal Care and Control. They had, in their adoption center, they had 90 kennels, and the dogs had to be removed. So they're taken out and tied to the wall, cleaned, and put back in, which is an emotional, behavioral nightmare for the dogs, right? Really deteriorating for them. So this one gentleman had been cleaning those kennels for 20 years, and when we showed up, they let us, with the volunteers that were involved in the seminar, they let us come in one morning at 7, and they had these amazing play yards. Literally, I think there were like 20 different yards out there, so even if we had a dog that was dog aggressive, we had a single yard that they could go to. So they allowed the volunteers just to come and run the dogs to us, and we got all of the dogs out of his way, and he cleaned that whole 90 kennel area in an hour and a half because he literally just, right? And it was like he loved us. And then normally it would take him 3.5 to 6.5 hours to clean that area depending upon how full it was. And that day we didn't have 90 dogs, but we had 55 dogs out at one time because of the way that they had their yard set up. We don't have anyone qualified. And we take volunteers, staff members. In fact, it's really important to us that you don't have to, like if you have a behavior department or a trainer, but they're not really comfortable with dog-to-dog stuff, you don't want to say this person has to run playgroups. You have to have somebody that's really into it and wants to do it, and we don't care what your position is. We've got some EDs, we've got some vets that run playgroups, like it's amazing. And then, of course, everybody's worried about the risk of fights. So, and if any of you did attend Dr. Darpino's presentation yesterday, they've done a really expansive survey. This is our little wimpy trying for our first time survey monkey, and Dr. Darpino gave us some advice that we need to ask the questions better, which she did, and then she got some information that was thicker, more comprehensive than this, but she said it better than we do, but playgroups are cool, is the conclusion, right? Playgroups are good. So remember, happier equals healthier, which equals more adoptable. And this is the big one. We use the 5 freedoms. We exploit this for our purposes to tell you, you have to do playgroups. They said so, right? Because we're supposed to give them the freedom to express normal behavior, and that means dogs being able to engage with other dogs socially should be part of this one. They're all extremely important, but we bank on that one. So this is, if you guys have seen Brent speak from Kansas, when he was at Kansas City Pet Project, I had the privilege of working for him there. And this was a wonderful photo that they sent us from KCPP after we had left. And they did, I think it was 2 days after we left, they did their own playgroups. And this was the photo they sent of the dogs in their kennels. And they had a really, he told you those kennels were, it was an older building, double stacked, facing each other like the worst setup. Very, very stressful kennel environment. So this was, they weren't used to seeing this. And that was as a result of playgroups. So in 2016, we did our little Survey Monkey thing. We had 61 responses, which was a 40% response rate. I am actually really dumb about all this kind of stuff, so I have Emily here to bail me out. Dr. Darpino, you can step in and save me from myself if I say something stupid, but supposedly a 40% response rate is pretty good. We asked these kinds of questions, and some of them were subjective. You know, how do you feel this is affecting the animals? And you can't really measure that specifically. In fact, I can't wait for you guys to decide how are we going to measure quality of life, because that's the big one that we're looking for. How do we measure that? It's an opinion. And we're going to continue to do more research about this. We were granted from the Lazen Foundation. We have a position for 2 years, which is basically an analytical position that's just going to be backtracking on all the work that we've done and ask a bunch of questions so that I can come back hopefully in a year or 2 years and even have more information so that we know coming up front when we get to a shelter, what if we ask the right questions before we get there, what can we do to make sure that this sticks for you on the first time? So that's what we were really trying to figure out. Some shelters, we haven't even been to their shelter. They came and attended a seminar, and then they go back. I'm going to tell that story about Cleveland tomorrow. And then one of the shelters in that area, we hadn't gone to them, but they went back and started implementing playgroups just from attending the seminar. We didn't go. And then others, we've been a couple of times, and it's still crunchy for them. They still can't really get into that groove. So we really want to get a handle on how to make that smoother. So the shelter vets, I've already touched on this. Are they supportive? Happily, I think that if I asked this question 5 years ago, it wouldn't have looked like this. I mean, this is really thanks to the shelter medicine schools and some of these top vets like Dr. Crawford, Dr. Newberry, Dr. Darpino, Dr. Jefferson. A lot of shelter medicine veterinarians are really seeing the value in this. So it's super, super helpful. Because it was really hard. You know, when we get to the end game of life-saving, a lot of you are talking about when you get above 95%. We're basically talking about medical and behavioral, right? Medical takes expertise for sure. If you've got the money and you hire the right veterinarians, it's pretty straightforward. You just do the medical, right? Because you've got the money to do it. Behavior is a little bit more subjective, a lot messier, more gray, and I think that that's just going to be the final frontier that we're all facing, right? So it's really helpful to have the medical teams kind of behind this concept of treating the whole animal and taking care of them emotionally while they're taking care of them physically. And so the risk of disease, I liked this answer too. Most people are saying that they did not think that playgroups were the primary contributor to any outbreaks, okay? A couple of them said yes, but there was one that said that they think that as a result of playgroups, their kennel cough decreased significantly. So this is the big one for me, more accurate assessments of behavior. So the bottom line is hopefully this year, somebody will have where's Dr. Protopopova? Somebody, I need to cite something and say that the on-leash and barrier assessments are not accurate predictors of a dog's ability or inability to be social with other dogs. Can one of you researchers out there please do that so we can just cite that, right? Because I talk about it anecdotally all the time, and we see that experience. How many of you feel like that the on-leash assessments and the barrier assessments aren't good predictors of a dog's sociability? All right, so we're feeling it, you know, our experience, right? But we need science to back it up. This dog in particular, he was a dog that I had rated as dog offensive, which means he came in, he had extreme reactivity, on-leash reactivity from a big distance, possible redirection risk, beautiful with people. So this shelter, this was at Willamette. Humane Society. He'd been with them for a while, and they thought he was dog aggressive. We muzzled him from what they were reporting. He came in the yard and went right after the first dog he kind of had access to. We tried again, and then the third time that we tried, he actually did better. And so we told them, you know, I think that this is going to be a tough one for you guys. And they kind of persisted after we left and sent me some great pictures of him and in play groups, and it was actually really, really high defense. So he just had that reactivity, like, I'm going to get you before you get me. That was what was the motivation behind that behavior. And so they were actually able to help him resolve that and socialize successfully. So I love that. Here's a bunch of shelters, and we think there are more now, that as a result of us being there, abandoned the on-leash assessment part of their behavior evaluations and just went with their playgroup observations instead, which we love that. And obviously, if you know more, if you get to see the dogs playing in playgroup, you know more about them, it's going to be easier to match them, especially with families that do want to be social and tell you that they want to go hiking with their dogs off leash or go to the dog park or the dog beach or whatever. Okay, so dog aggression deflated. This is kind of speaking to that point. The question that we asked, do you feel that you are more accurately assessing dog aggression after implementing playgroup? And a lot of respondents felt that way, obviously. So Mary Martin, she's an interesting one for me. That woman is like my hero. She's now the executive director at Maricopa County. She's been in the business a long, long time, and I worked for her originally at Santa Fe Humane. It was a very different picture and model. She had a full-blown behavior department. They were wanting to, you know, do a version of what APA is doing and that Longmont's doing, and then now she's at Maricopa County, and so she's doing a whole opposite model, but she utilized playgroups in both of those contexts to get her where she needed to be for the population she was working with. And so what more can we learn when we implement playgroups? Do you feel the playgroups tell you more about a dog than just their sociability? How many of you do feel like you kind of learn more about their personality? You learn things about them on the whole just from watching them in playgroups. Some of you feel that way. I feel like it's how I actually really get to know who the dog is, right? Because our style of playgroups is really to let that be a dog-to-dog social interaction. So we tend, if you've seen the playgroups at APA, we really want them to be negotiating and having those conversations and have, Amanda, like I see some people sometimes, I'm like, ah! Anyway, so we want, she's amazing, that one. At any rate, I just lost my train of thought because I got excited when I saw you. Okay, what that says. Okay. All right. So how about playgroups as an adoption matching tool? Do you feel like you make better adoption matches? And remember, these questions are, do you feel? So this is the problem, that it was subjective, and that's why the serious scientists are like, but I'm still going to share it with you because we think it's interesting, right? Do you feel you make better adoption matches as a result of implementing playgroups? And that was an awesome response, right? And Northern Brevard, we had a blast. If any of you have been to any of the playgroup seminars, have you seen our little video of the little small dog that picks up the monster shake hand and is carrying it around? So adorable. That was from their shelter. You guys can stop me and ask questions because I'm trying to blow through this really quickly so that I'm not late. And aren't you all disappointed that I haven't shown you 15 videos already? All right, I know, I'm sorry. This is a data one, so I don't have as much video. So how many dogs are going to playgroup? So Dr. Darpino, I'm really interested in the stuff that you learned with your sampling so much larger than ours, because this is that we had a hit on a little bit of a larger group from our respondents, but again, they're small. So I think in Dr. Darpino's, it was the less than 5 was your largest yes answer, right? Yeah, and I loved when you said that you wanted a little bit more robust than that. And so we were excited because we thought at least we had one jump up. But again, her sample size that she was asking was much, much larger than ours, so hers counts more. So if you guys didn't hear what Dr. Darpino said, she said her sample, their survey was sent out to just shelters across the country. She wasn't specifically trying to survey shelters that had a DPFL seminar. And some of the purpose was to see if you started to see trends of also how does DPFL affect the training of playgroups is something that you're trying to get to also, right? I can't wait till you have answers for us for that. But so these are just the shelters that we worked with. So that's the difference in the questions that she was asking to those shelters compared to ours. So playgroups being a people pleaser too. Actually, Marianne Gasparo, right? From Animal Rescue League of Boston, when I originally did, she is the first person that came to us after a seminar and really stressed how much happier the staff was when they started implementing playgroups at Animal Rescue League of Boston, and that it wasn't the most disappointing part of the day to come in the morning and have to do the cleaning routine, because that was being the playgroups being incorporated then, and so the staff, it was joyful for them. So here's from New York City Animal Care and Control. I actually love this gentleman's expression.
Well, today has been an amazing day for me, being at Animal Care and Control for 15 years. It has really opened up my mind, and to see the dogs interacting with each other and having a real, good connection and greeting each other with respect. And, I'm amazed.
Did you think that they weren't going to get along so well?
I thought there would be a lot of catastrophes.
All right. So you think that they're going to have a good time with us?
I'm quite sure they will.
All right, good deal. All right. Who are you, miss?
I'm Jennifer Abrams. I supervise the behavior department here at Animal Care and Control of New York City. So I've been here for the full series of the trainings, and it's blown my mind. My story for today here in Brooklyn is that our adoptions room is set up so that we have one aisle and we have cages on both sides. And normally when you walk a dog down that aisle of cages, which we call the gauntlet, you have the dog on leash reacting, you've got the dog on leash super tight, you've got the dogs in the kennels reacting, and they lunge and they bark, and it's loud and it's scary and it's intense, and the dog gets into the kennel and it's really hyped up. And I just returned a dog to adoptions who had a nice long play session out here, and her name's Matilda, and she walked very nicely on leash, nice loose leash the whole time. The dogs we walked past were resting. They would sniff each other sometimes and then just continue on. There was very little reacting. It was so much more pleasant. When I put her away in her kennel, she just went to the back, drank some water, relaxed. The entire thing was so much less traumatic than it usually is.
Can any of you relate to that experience in some kennels, right? So for her, he was expressing just that this was fun and amazing to see, and she was saying, oh my God, it was so much less stressful as a result of having the dogs go to playgroup. So pleased them for different reasons, but I love that video. So reported volunteer participation. This is something that I really hope to see expanded. At APA, do you guys have volunteers ever running your playgroups? Yeah? Is that daily, running to, or running them? Yeah, so at Longmont and then at a lot of other shelters, some of them are saying that we just don't have the staff to run playgroups, and so they are allowing volunteers to do it. And as far as liability and safety, I feel like if you're going to let volunteers step into a kennel and take a dog and leash them up in a kennel and walk them out of the kennel environment, if you have the sense that being able to run them in playgroups is more dangerous than that activity that we are all kind of accustomed to, I mean, if they can go in and walk a dog, they can walk a dog to playgroup for sure. And then if they have the interest and the inclination to run playgroups, we strongly urge you to allow your volunteers to help, especially if it's a deal breaker. If without letting the volunteers do it, you can't get it done. Yes? Oh, so the comment was is that a satellite location? Yeah, it's our little dogs. Yeah, so the little dogs at the satellite location, the volunteers actually are the playgroup monitors there. So that's great. So more shelters at this point are not having their volunteers run playgroups. I really do hope in the next year or two that we see that shift, at least that it's even Steven. It's not that it should be the volunteers instead of the staff, but if you're going to tell me, oh, we can't do it because we don't have the staff, it's one of those, like, that's not a legit answer to me. So I'd love to see that switch. Letting them run dogs to playgroup, obviously, everybody's pretty much reliant upon the volunteers to do that. I think that's pretty obvious. Because again, if you're going to let volunteers go in and handle and walk your dogs, then why not let them walk the dog to play yard, right? Interestingly, when we went, there was a research project. The ASPCA originally sent us to the Downey shelter at the County of Los Angeles shelters, and we were doing 30 days of just running playgroups for them. So we weren't teaching them how to do it. We were just going to implement a playgroup program, and they were measuring before we went, during our time there, and then after, and then to see what the impact was. Unfortunately, they ended up doing construction on one of the kennels, and so they lost 40 kennels while we were there, which completely skewed that whole thing, so we didn't get the data out of that we wanted to. But in that process, they didn't have an active, even volunteer walking dog program at that time. As a result of us being there, they ended up asking us to teach them how to run it, and they continued playgroups. We now have full engagement with the County of Los Angeles shelters to get them up and running, and so that has stimulated and triggered them pushing through with a volunteer program and volunteers are cleared to run dogs to playgroups, but they haven't quite worked out the full dog walking volunteer program. So interestingly, the playgroups triggered them allowing the volunteers to start handling the dogs, which was critical at that facility. So I can't stress enough how important volunteers are. At this particular shelter, when we originally went to Rochester Animal Services in 2013, there's the stats about that shelter. They told us flat out that that volunteers were going to have to take the whole program, that they just did not have staff to do it. So that was their intention from the get-go, which was really interesting for an open admission municipal shelter. And at that time, if dogs failed the on-leash assessment and they had done well on the rest of the behavior evaluation, they would be euthanized for dog aggression. And so that actually turned on its head, and it started right away. They did allow the volunteers, if the dog did well in every other aspect of the test, but failed that one, they would send them out to playgroups and they would let the volunteers report back to them if the dogs were successful in playgroups, and those dogs then would be allowed to go to the adoption floor instead of being euthanized. That was a huge accomplishment. And that's it. That's what I have to say about that. And so do playgroups actually attract volunteers? This surprised me. I actually thought this would be one of those answers where it was all yes. But apparently not. And sometimes we've gone into shelters and the volunteers that have been there, long-term volunteers and are really into their rhythm and their routine of how they enrich the dogs, can get like litter boxy about that, which is weird to me. Like they're like, we don't want you in your dirty playgroups. We have our little routine that we do. So it's really funny that we've come across that a couple of times, that they get cranky about us. So I'm hoping that we see a bigger jump in the positive responses to this one, that they absolutely feel like they're attracting volunteers. We've heard stories. We have shelters that put bleachers up outside of the yards because people love to come and watch them. I've had that experience where it attracts people to come and want to start volunteering at the shelter because they felt like, this is the way I used to feel. I would cry every time I went into a kennel. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I do seminars now, I send my instructors in to do our before and after video. I don't go into kennels because it will still make me cry when I go into kennels after all these years. And so it's nice when volunteers feel like I came in for 2 hours and instead of allotting 15 minutes per dog and then taking them back to the kennel when I know I haven't even scratched the surface yet, and that kind of, how many of you have cried when you go back to your car after going to try to help, right? And then you pick yourself up and you go again. But there's 100 more dogs that need your time. When you get to go for 2 hours and you got 20 dogs out running them back and forth, and you really get your steps in, right? And you're doing all that, it's like kind of you go to your car like, yes! Typically you feel better, like it just feels good, especially when you see them being so joyful and engaging with the other dogs. At least that's the experience that I've seen a lot of people have. So length of stay, this is a biggie, right? This is a big one that we want to attend to now that we're getting to this level of life-saving. So it seems that for most of these shelters, there was obviously a decrease. The most significant one, I'll give you more details about that, at Santa Barbara Humane Society. Shadows Fund, the only one that was about the same. That is a very, very small sanctuary, right? So their mission was different than the rest of the shelters that were there. So that's the reason that they didn't seem to budge on that much. But you're going to see them talking about it in the final video. So this was our most dynamic length of stay impact. So pre-play groups, 2.5 years at this Humane Society. This is a private Humane Society. They were not pulling dogs from other community shelters at that time. They had more dogs than the capacity was for, I think, 70, but they had 100 plus dogs. Post the playgroup at the time of the seminar, it was down to a 9-month average length of stay had changed, and then it's now down to 3 months. In fact, they called us back because they were having such success with the program. They wanted to host a training for other shelters in the community. And when we came back, they had to borrow dogs from another shelter because they only had, 14 dogs? There's 7 dogs on site of their own. They could not keep the dogs in-house. They were getting adopted so quickly once they started implementing playgroups. That is a really extreme example. I don't want to tell you that happens everywhere, but it had a huge impact for them. And then their live release rate, they were already at a 90%, but it bumped them to 95% once they started implementing playgroups. And they did share with us at that time, it really was, sometimes it's really hard to, I don't want to falsely advertise something. So if you really have to isolate that playgroups is the only thing that changed, and that's why you see some of the success in this. And I don't know how much you guys tried to target that, narrow it down, that was playgroup the only thing you were assessing when you asked those questions, but It is pretty challenging for this shelter. They were really established. They were doing things the way they'd been doing it. There wasn't anything new happening at that time, so this was one that was pretty isolated to playgroups. And a couple of shelters have discontinued. And remember, this is only 60 respondents, so I think that there's more. I know that there's more that have started and stopped. And this is what we really want to get to the bottom of with this position that we have that's going to analyze all this, because it's not that, I don't feel like every shelter is going to keep it going, but I really think it should be most. I would love to see, this is still not bad out of 5 out of all the ones that we did. And one of them, it was even at the seminar that this was a touchy one. We went to this seminar and they had been basically forced to have us because there had been, what's that called? They were being a community assessment audit, and they were told that they had to have a program come in, and they were not really interested in the program. So there was a lot of resistance. So I'm not being dismissive of it, but there was a fight and there was an injury, but the medical team was really, it felt like they were looking for a reason, but that did happen, right? So we had injuries on the initial seminar, and they said, never mind, it's not worth it. That was their experience. Okay. I felt like we went into that one kind of knowing that this wasn't going to stick. But anyway, do playgroups save lives? So our average increase from our respondents was a 6% increase in live release. So when you're getting to that top level, when you're getting up to the 85, 90%, that's really significant. You know, when you're down starting at a 30% save rate, we definitely want to see a much bigger jump, but the 6% is the average increase in live release. And the one here, Palm Springs Animal Shelter, that had a decrease, I think it was, where are they? Palm Springs, the second one to the end, that one, they took in a big hoarding case at that time, and so that they said that they didn't feel that implementing playgroups is what reduced their live release that year. They felt like it was this case that they were inundated with. So we had a couple of 100% of the respondents answered yes, which that was really interesting to me. I didn't anticipate that. But enhancing quality of life, everybody felt that the quality of life for the dogs in their care was better. And that's 1998 when I started this whole thing. To be honest with you, as a professional trainer coming into a shelter environment, my personal objective was to move the bar of unmanageable, untreatable, that stuff, because I felt a lot of dogs were being labeled as that weren't. So I wanted to have some contribution to expanding that threshold, right? But in my time of doing this, and now that we're running around, it is unique that DPFL gets to go into this many shelters of all different missions and level of resources and how they function, and become a part of your operations for a chunk of time. I mean, I don't think, so it's a unique perspective, I think, about what's going on in sheltering, because we can kind of get in there with all of you. And this thing of quality of life and making sure that while we're striving to hit life-saving, that we don't forget the experience the animals are having in our care, which is also why I am so excited. Dr. Darpino, congratulations on what you've learned about the fostering, because it's spot on about that. Yeah, if we could just get them out of the shelter, that is the best thing. So I think when we want to protect them and keep them with us, we just have to not think that way. It's not great for them, right? So enhancing quality of life. I believe strongly, I'll say it, I said it yesterday, if you strive for creating excellent quality of life, you're going to get life-saving as an outcome, in my opinion. It's not measured at all. If you strive for life-saving alone and don't pay attention to quality of life, I just don't feel like you might not be hitting that humane thing that you really want to hit, you know, that warehousing of animals. And we do, I have to say, I'm seeing it more and more, animals that are just trapped in shelters for years and years and years. I just think that can't be so. Is it beneficial or detrimental, like the risk-reward analysis? Do you believe the benefits of playgroups outweigh the risks? Every one of our respondents said yes. Like, that was a really, really pleasant surprise to me. Oh, even the ones that, yeah, right. Thank you for piping in. Emily reminded me, even the ones that discontinued playgroups, the person that responded, I'll bet you anything, one of those respondents, if it had been given to a different person, the person that brought us in because they were forced to, she said she felt that the benefits outweighed the risk. But I bet you if you gave that to somebody else in the shelter, it wouldn't have been that answer. But so every dog, every day. We really want this to be the standard of care. And so this is just an example of almost polar opposites, that you have Shadows Fund, which is a limited admission sanctuary. They only take in about 100 animals a year, and they have a 100% live release rate because they're a sanctuary, they do not euthanize. And then City Dogs in Cleveland, open admission, municipal shelter. I'm going to tell a deeper story about Cleveland. It was one of the most impactful seminars that I personally have ever done. There are about 3,500 plus animals a year. They had an 80% live release rate. Both of those organizations in very different positions are really thinking that playgroups were the game changer for them, right? And Ventura County Animal Services, I just love using this picture because on their play yards, I don't know if you guys can read it, they have these little, for the public that comes by and watches them. We are maximizing our resources. A 30-minute playgroup session is equivalent to a 2-hour leash walk. Playgroups allow us to attend to the largest number of dogs in the shortest amount of time. So these are just little info things that are up here so that if the public is wondering, what the heck is going on here, right? Better adoptions. The dogs in playgroup get adopted faster. We have more info on our dogs' play styles and social skills, which leads to better dog-to-dog matches and fewer returns. And then no guarantees that what you see here is only a snapshot of these dogs' behavior here at the shelter. In other words, and Carrie touched upon that, how many of you had the chicken, sweet, like soft dog in your shelter? You send them home and they're a territorial Tasmanian devil, right? So here's the thing, people. We really have to understand, especially if you're interested in the behavior piece. Once you change environment and once you change relationship, you can see a completely different behavioral picture. So this whole notion for all these years that we're advising people that we know what they're going to get when they go home, you know how you can ensure a better outcome? Training, like what Carrie demonstrates, right? Putting the dogs through paces, generalizing their skills so that they can respond to different people in different locations under different levels of distraction. Those are the equalizers that stabilize so you have more of a predictable response because you've put them through those paces. But just thinking we can take them from our shelter and put them at home and guarantee what they're going to get, we have to get over ourselves on that one a little bit, I think. So moving forward, in my humble opinion, you do not need a behavior program to implement playgroups. In fact, if I have my way, after all these years, and me being the person that developed full behavior programs at 2 physical shelters, right? So I've done that whole thing. Love being able to support APA. They're a great model of it as well. Ideally, my fantasy is that the adoption centers behavior doesn't exist there, that the adoption centers just get to adopt all the animals out. Like Ellen talked about it in the first morning. All the cute and cuddly stay in the municipal shelters because those are the easiest ones to get adopted. Do I sound like a broken record? You guys heard me yesterday about this. And that we have these behavior centers that are nationally funded, that small population of dogs that actually needs that specialized skill set. Those centers are designed just to serve those animals, and then they can be redistributed back to adoption centers or sanctuary or determine that we need to let them go. And I think that number would be very small. That's my hope for the end game. Consider playgroups as a standard part of your daily routine. Revisit medical protocols. Like County of Los Angeles, largest intake facility in the country, over 70,000 animals a year, and they are rolling out full playgroups at all of their facilities. And Dr. I can never pronounce her name, Salcedo. Dr. Salcedo changed the protocols and to facilitate playgroups, that they were allowed to run the dogs that had kennel cough, URI dogs, were allowed to run through playgroups at the end of the day. They didn't have to sanitize the yards because that all happens naturally and organically as the yards just sit overnight. And so she revised all of those protocols to attend to the implementation of playgroups, right? Woo! Yes. What? No, sorry. Emily's like, no. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you then. The question was, do kennel cough dogs play with healthy dogs? No, but let me tell you the truth about that. So when we showed up there, remember, we weren't there to teach them. So they had labeled dogs as these are the sick dogs, these are healthy dogs. We were bringing the healthy dogs out. They were sick. Nobody was seeing it. And we were like, at that point, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm like, nobody's telling us no, we're letting the dogs play, right? So because it was such a critical triage moment, right? Those dogs were not getting out of the kennels for weeks. So, and then she ended up changing the policy to facilitate. And to be honest with you, we ended up helping them because playgroups were a better indicator. Now that they were given permission, the people running playgroups, if a dog comes up and they're green snotty, they'll send them away and alert the medical staff, hey, this one's actually got kennel cough, right? So it actually now helps medical, right? And so originally those 2 programs could combat one another, but the opposite was happening. And shelters working together, hey, that's what we're all here for, right? We're going to save more lives. So I can share with you our 200th shelter celebration video.
If someone were to come to me and say, what's play group bring to you? And I immediately start thinking all these things. But first, it's just the word inspiration. So we're fully inspired on watching not only our staff, but our volunteers work with the dogs.
The dogs are a lot less stressed. They get outside more frequently. We're getting dogs out multiple times a day. In the kennel, they're a lot more relaxed. We're doing some more in-kennel enrichment as well. We're able to focus more on the dogs that are having a harder time in the kennel.
I think that they are going to experience a better quality of life while being here. I think that it will make them be more marketable to people who are physically seeing them outside of the shelter, who can watch through the fencing and see them playing.
'Cause everybody I know is growing old. And I don't wanna go, no, how am I supposed to slow it down so I can figure out who I am?
So I think it's really going to help our process in helping them adapt to what a normal life may be like. The temperament inside the kennels is a lot lower. There's not as much excitement when dogs are being walked in and out. The kennels are clean. And I think the dogs they're tired, so they're not so much at the fence and barking uncontrollably.
Some of the dogs that we thought could not be with other dogs turned out to be our helper dogs and the best dogs that we ever had, and have since been adopted. We've learned so much more about them because of play groups. They're getting more exercise, more play, more socialization. They're catching members of their own species. It's the best thing that's ever happened to dogs here in Jackson.
It's really exciting to see that when we bring the dogs out into the play group, that we're also seeing a lot of the rescue groups engaging and taking a look and assessing the pets themselves to see how they're interacting with the other dogs. The adopters, potential adopters, are seeing them play and actually have adopted them right out of the play groups. So it's pretty exciting to us. It's just really great to see the interaction of the public, the rescue groups, and the dogs all together.
'Cause everybody I know is growing old. And I don't wanna go, no, how am I supposed to slow it down so I can figure out who I am?
That's a pig.
Some of us surviving, some of us just roaming, some of us just hoping the world will move on slowly. Some of us alive, but we're all gonna die one day. Yeah, some of us surviving, some of us just roaming, some of us just hoping the world will move on slowly. Some of us alive, we're all gonna die one day. 'Cause everybody I know is growing old too quickly. And I don't wanna go, no, how am I supposed to slow it down so I can figure out who I am?
Thank you guys for coming, because this has been the best thing that ever happened to us.